Hey everybody, this is your man Jim. Just sit back, relax, listen to me as I tell you a story. It'll be all about stories, mystery, horror, classical, even some poems. So please enjoy this. Hey y'all, this is Jim again. Today I'm going to be reading The Valley of Spiders by H.G. Wells. Towards midday, the three pursuers came abruptly around a bend in the torrent bed upon the sight of a very broad and spacious valley. The difficult and winding trench of pebbles along which they had trapped the fugitives for so long expanded to a broad slope, and with a common impulse the three men left the trail and rode to a little eminence set with olive dun trees, and there halted the two others as became them, a little behind the man with the silver-studded bridle. For the space they scanned the great expanse below. Then, with eager eyes, it spread remoter and remoter, with only a few clusters of sere thorn bushes here and there, and the dim suggestions of how of some now waterless ravine to break its desolation of yellow grass. Its purple distances melted at last into the slopes of the further hills. Hills, it might be, of greener kind, and above them, invisibly supported, seeming indeed to blue, hang in the blue, where the snow-clad summits of mountains, indeed to hang in the blue, where the snow-clad summits of mountains that grew larger and bolder to the northwestward as the sides of the valley drew together, and westward the valley opened until a distant darkness under the sky told where the forest began. But the three men looked neither east nor west, but only steadfastly across the valley. The gaunt man with the scarred lip was the first to speak. Nowhere, he, he said, with a sigh of disappointment in his voice. But after all, they had a full day's start. They don't know we are after them, said the little man on the white horse. She would know, said the leader bitterly, as if speaking to himself. Even then, they can't go fast. They got no beast but the mule, and all today the girl's foot has been bleeding. The man with the silver bottle flashed a quick intensity of rage on him. Do you think I haven't seen that? He snarled. It helps anyhow, whispered the little man to himself. The gaunt man with the scarred lip stared impassively. They can't be over the valley, he said. If we ride hard. He glanced at the white horse and paused. Curse all white horses, said the man with the silver bridle, and turned to scan the beast, his curse included. The little man looked down between the melancholy ears of his steed. I did my best, he said. Two others stared again across the valley for a space. The gaunt man passed the back of his hand across the scarred lip. Come up, said the man who owned the silver bridle. Suddenly the little man started and jerked his rein, and the horse, whose of the three made a multitudinous faint pattering upon the withered grass as they turned back towards the trail. They rode cautiously down the long slope before them, and so came through a waste of prickly, twisted bushes and strange, dry shapes of horny branches that grew amongst the rocks into the levels below. And there the trail grew faint, for the soil was scanty, and the only herbage was a scorched dead straw that lay upon the ground. Still, by hard scanning, by leaning beside the horse's neck, and pausing ever and again, even these white men could contrive to follow after their prey. There were there were trodden places, bit and broken blades of the coarse grass, and ever and again the sufficient intimidation of a footmark. And once the leader saw a brown smear of blood where the half-caste girl may have trod, and at that, under his breath, he cursed her for a fool. The gaunt man checked the leader's tracking, and the little man on the white horse rode behind, a man lost in a dream. They rode one after another. The man with the silver bridle led the way, and they spoke never a word. After a time, it came to the little man on the white horse, and the world was very still. He started out of the stream, besides the little noises of the horses and equipment. The whole great valley kept the brooding quiet of a painted scene. Before him went his master and his fellow, each intently leaning forward to the left, each impassively moving with the paces of his horse. Each shadows went before them, still noiseless, tapering attendants, and nearer a crouched cool shape was his own. He looked about him. What was it had gone? Then he remembered the reverberation for the banks of the gorge and the perpetual accompaniment of shifting, jostling pebbles, and moreover, there was no breeze. That was it. What a vast, still place it was. Monotonous afternoon slumber, and the sky open and blank, except for a somber veil of haze that had gathered in the upper valley. He straightened his back, threaded with the bridle, puckered his lips to whistle, and simply sighed. He turned in the saddle for a time and stared at the throat of the mountain gorge, out of which they had come. Slopes on either side, with never a sign of a decent beast or tree, much less a man. What a land it was, what a wilderness. He dropped again into his former pose. It filled him with momentary pleasure to see her rise stick a purple-black flash out in the form of a snake, and vanish amidst the brown. After all, the infernal valley was alive, and then to rejoice him still more came a little breath across his face, a whisper that came and went, the faintest inclination of a stiff black antler bush upon a little crest, the first intimations of a possible breeze. Idly he reddened his finger and held it up. He pulled up sharply to avoid a collision with the gaunt man, who had stopped at fault upon the trail. Just at the guilty moment, he caught his master's eye looking towards him. For a time he forced an interest in tracking. Then, as they rode on again, he studied his master's shadow and hat and shoulder, appearing and disappearing beyond the gaunt man's nearer contours. They had ridden 4 days out of out of the very limits of the world into the desolate place, short of water, with nothing but a strip of dried meat under the saddles, rock over rocks and mountains, where where surely gone, but these fugitives had never had ever been there for that. And all this was for a girl, a mere willful child, and the man had whole cityfuls of people to do his basest biddings, girls and women. Why, in the name of passionate folly, this one in particular? Asked the little man, and scowled at the world and licked his parched lips. With the blackened tongue, it was the way of the master, and he that was all he knew. Just because she sought to evade him, his eye caught a whole row of high-plumed canes bending in unison, and then the tails of silk that hung around the neck slapped and fell. The breeze was growing stronger. Somehow it took the stiff stillness out of things, and that was well. And that was well. "Hello," said the gaunt man, and Three stopped abruptly. "What?" asked the master. "What?" "Over there," said the gaunt man, pointing up the valley. "What?" "Something coming towards us." And he spoke of yellow animal crested and rise that came bearing down upon them. It was a big wild dog coming before the wind, tongue out at a steady pace, and running with such an intensity of purpose that he did not seem to see the horseman he approached. He ran with his nose up, following. It was plain, neither scent nor quarry. As he drew nearer, the little man felt for his sword. He's mad," said the gaunt rider. "Shout," said the little man, and shouted. The dog came on. Then the little man's blade was already out. It swerved aside and went panting by them in the past, and passed. The eyes of the little man followed its flight. There was no foam, he said, for a space. The man over the silver-studded bridle stared up the valley. "Oh, come on," he cried at last. "What does it matter?" And jerked his horse into movement again. The little man left the insoluble mystery of a dog that fled from nothing but the wind, and lapsed into profound musings on human character. "Come on," he whispered to himself. "Why should it be given to one man to say, 'Come on,' with that stupendous violence of effect? Always, all his life, the man with the silver bridle had been saying that if I said it, thought the little man. But people marveled when the master was disobeyed, even in the wildest things. The half-caste girl seemed to him, seemed to everyone, mad, blasphemous almost. The little man, by way of comparison, reflected on the gaunt rider, with his scarred lamp as stalwart, st- stalwart, 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 as, as his master, and brave, and indeed perhaps braver. And yet for him there was obedience, nothing but to give the obedience duly and stoutly. Certain sensations of his hands and knees called the little man back to more immediate things. He became aware of something. He rode up beside the gaunt fellow. "Do you notice the horses?" he said in undertone. The gaunt face looked interrogation. "They don't like this wind," said the little man, and dropped behind as the man with the silver bridle turned upon him. "It's all right," said the gaunt man. Uh, said the gaunt-faced man. They rode on again for a space in silence. The foremost two rode downcast upon the trail. The hindmost man watched the haze that crept down the fastest of the valley nearer and nearer, and noted how the wind grew in strength moment by moment. Far away to the left he saw a line of dark bulks, wild hog perhaps, galloping down the valley, but of that he said nothing, nor did he remark again upon the uneasiness of the horses. And then he saw first one and then the second great white ball, a great shining white ball like a gigantic head of a thistle down that drove before the wind athwart the path. These balls soared high in the air and dropped and rose again for a moment and hurried on and passed, but the sight of them, the restlessness of the horses increased. Then presently he saw that more of them drifting close, and then soon very many more went hurrying towards him down the valley. They became aware of a skrilling. Athwart the path a huge boar rushed, turning his head, but for one instant to glance at him, and then hurling on down the valley again. And at that, all three stopped and sat in the saddles, staring into the thickening haze that was coming upon them. "If it were not for this thistledown," began the leader, but now Big Loeb came drifting past within a score of yards of them. It was really not an even an even spear at all, but a vast, soft, ragged, filmy thing. A sheet gathered by the corners, an aerial jellyfish, as it were, but rolling over and over as it advanced, trailing long, cobwebby threads and streamers that floated in its wake. Is it thistle down? Said the little man. I don't like this stuff, said the gaunt man, and they looked at one another. Curse it, cried the leader. The air's full of it here. If it keeps out this place, it will stop us altogether. The instinctive feeling, such as lions from out of a herd of deer at this approach of some ambiguous thing, prompted them to turn their horses to the rear, ride forward for a few paces, and stare at the advancing multitude of floating masses that came on before the wind with a sort of smooth swiftness, rising and falling noiselessly, sinking to earth, rebounding high, soaring, all with the perfect unanimity, with a still, deliberate assurance. Right and left of the horsemen, the pioneers of the strange army passed. At one, that rode along the ground, breaking shapelessly and trailing out reluctantly into long, grappling ribbons and bands. All three horses began to shy and dance. The master had seized. The master was seized with a sudden unreasonable impatience. He cursed the drifting globes roundly. Get on, he cried. Get on. What do these things matter? How can they matter? Back to the trail. He fell swearing at his horse and saw the bit across its mouth. And that's going to be it for part one. Next time will be the part two. It'll finish the story. So, I guess we'll catch you then. Bye. Hello, everybody. This is part two, a story by H.G. Wells, The Valley of Spiders. He gripped the bridle of his prancing horse and searched amidst the grass. A long clinging thread fell across his face. A gray streamer dropped about his bridle arm. Some big active thing with many legs ran down the back of his head. He looked up to discover one of those gray masses anchored as it were above him by these things and flapping out ends as a sail flaps when a boat comes about, but noiselessly. He had an impression of many eyes of a dense crew, of squat bodies of long, many-jointed limbs, hauling at the mooring ropes to bring the thing upon down him. For a space he stared up, remaining in his prancing horse with the instinct born of years of horsemanship Then the flat of a sword smote his back, and the blade flashed overhead and cut the drifting balloon of spiderweb free, and the whole mass lifted softly and drove clear and away. "Spiders!" cried the voice of the gaunt man. "The things are full of big spiders. Look, my lord." The man with the silver bridle still followed the mass that drove away. "Look, my lord." The master found himself staring down at a red smashed thing on the ground that, in spite of partial obliterations, could still wriggle unraveling legs. Then the gaunt man pointed to another mass that bore down upon them. He drew his sword hastily up the valley. Now it was like a fog bank torn to rags. He tried to grasp the situation. "Ride for it," the little man was shouting. "Ride for it down the valley." What happened then was like the confusion of a battle. The man with the silver bridle saw the little man go past him, slashing furiously at imaginary cobwebs, saw him cannon into the horse of the gaunt man and hurl it and its rider to earth. His own horse went a dozen paces before he could rein it in. Then he looked up to avoid imaginary dangers, and then back again to see a horse rolling on the ground. The gaunt man standing and slashing over it at a rent and fluttering mass of gray that streamed and wrapped about them both, as thick and fast as a thistle down on wasteland. On a windy day in July, the cobweb masses were coming in. The little man had dismounted, but he dared not release his horse. He was endeavoring to lower the struggling brute back to the strength of one arm, while with the other he slashed aimlessly. The tentacles of every second gray mass had entangled themselves with the struggle, and the second gray mass came to its moorings and slowly sank. The master set his teeth, gripped his bridle, lowered his head, and spurred his horse forward. The horse on the ground rolled over. There was blood and moving shapes upon the flanks of the gaunt man. Suddenly leaving it, ran forward towards his master. Perhaps 10 paces. His legs were swathed and encumbered with gray. He made ineffectual movements with his sword. Gray streamers waved from him. There was a thin veil of gray across his face. With his left hand he beat at it, something on his body, and suddenly he stumbled and fell. He struggled to rise and fell again, and suddenly, horribly, began to howl. "Oh, oh, oh!" The master could see the great spiders upon him, and upon the ground. As he strove to face the horse near the gesticulating, screaming gray object that struggled up and down, there came a clatter of hooves, and the little man in act of mounting, shoulders balanced on his belly athwart the white horse, and clutching its mane, were balanced while clutching his mane, whirled past again, a clinging thread of gray gossamer swept across the master's face, and about them and over them it seemed it seemed this drifting, noiseless cobweb circled and drew nearer him. To the day of his death, he never knew just how the event of the moment happened. Did he indeed turn his horse, or did it really of its own accord stampede after its fellow? Suffice it that in another second he was galloping full tilt down the valley with the swords whirling furiously overhead, and all about him on the cricketing breeze the spiders, airships that were bundles of air seats seemed to him to hurry in a conscious pursuit. Clatter, clatter, thud, thud, the man with the silver bridle rode, heedless of his direction, with his fearful face looking up now right, now left, and his sword arm ready to slash, and a few hundred yards ahead of him, with the tail of torn cobweb trailing behind him, rode the little man on the white horse, but still imperfectly in the saddle that reeds bent before them. The wind blew fresh and strong over his shoulder. The master could see the webs hurrying to overtake them. He was so intent to escape the spiders. He was so intent to escape the spiders' webs that only on his horse gathered together for a leap did he realize the ravine ahead, and then he realized it to misunderstand and interfere. He was leaning forward on his horse's back and sat up and back, all too late. But if in his excitement he had failed to leap, at any rate he had not forgotten how to fall. He was horseman again in mid-air. He came off clear with a mere bruise upon his shoulder, and his horse rolled, kicking spasmodic legs, and lay still. But the master's sword drove its point into the hard soil and snapped clean across, as though chance refused him any longer as her knight, and the splintered end missed his face by an inch or so. He was on his feet in a moment, breathlessly scanning the onrushing spider webs. For a moment he was minded to run at the start of the ravine and turn back. He ran aside once again to dodge on one drifting terror, and then he had swiftly clambering down the precipitous sides and out of touch of the gale. There, under the lee of the dry torrent steeper banks, he might crouch and watch these strange gray masses pass in safety, till the wind fell, and it became possible to escape. And there for a long time he crouched, watching the strange, gray, ragged masses trail their streamers along across the narrow sky. Once a stray spider fell into the ravine close beside him, a full foot it measured from leg to leg, and its body was half a human's hand. And after he had watched this monstrous atrocity of search and escape for a little while, it tempted it to bite his broken sword. He lifted up his iron-heeled boot and smashed it into a pulp. He swore as he did so, and for a time sought up and down for another. Then, presently, when he was sure the spider swarms could not drop into the ravine, he found a place where he could sit down, and sat and fell into deep thought and began, after his manner, to gnaw his knuckles and bite his nails. And from this he was moved by the coming of the man with the white horse. He heard him long before he saw him, a clattering of hoofs, stumbling footsteps, and a reassuring voice. Then the little man appeared in a rueful figure, still with the tail of a white cobweb trailing behind him. They approached each other without speaking, without a salutation. The little man was fatigued and shamed to the pitch of hopeless bitterness. It came to a stop at last, face to face with his seated master. The latter wrenched a little under his dependent's eye. "Well," he said at last, with no pretense of authority, "you left him? My horse bolted. I know, so did mine." He laughed at his master mirthlessly. "I say my horse bolted," said the man who once had a silver-studded bridle. "Cowards both," said the little man. The other gnawed his knuckles through some meditative moments, with his eye on his inferior. "Don't call me a coward," he said at length. "You are a coward like myself. A coward, possibly. There is a limit beyond which every man must fear. That I have learnt at last, but not like yourself. That is where the difference comes in. I never could have dreamt you would have left him. He saved your life 2 minutes before. Where are you, our Lord?" The master gnawed his knuckles again, and the countenance was dark. "No man calls me a coward," he said. "No, a broken sword is better than none. One spavined white horse cannot be expected to carry 2 men a 4 days' journey. I hate white horses, but this time it cannot be helped. You begin to understand me? I perceive that you are minded of the strength of one you have seen and fancy to taint my reputation. It is men of your sort who unmake kings, besides which I never liked you. "My lord," said the little man. "No," said the master, "no." He stood up sulkily and as the little man moved. For a minute perhaps they faced one another. Overhead the spider's balls ripped driving. There was a quick movement among the pebbles, a running of feet, a cry of despair, a gasp and a blow. Towards nightfall the wind fell, the sun set in a calm serenity, and the man who had once possessed the silver bridle came at last, very cautiously and by an easy slope out of the ravine again. But now he led the white horse that once belonged to the little man. He would have gone back to the horse to get his silver-mounted bridle again, but he feared night and a quickening breeze might still find him in the valley. And besides, he disliked greatly to think he might discover his horse all covered in cobwebs and perhaps unpleasantly eaten. And as he thought of those cobwebs and all the dangers left, and of all the dangers he had been through, and the manner in which he had been preserved that day, his hand sought a little reliquary that hung about his neck, and he collapsed it for a moment with heartfelt gratitude, and he did so. His eyes went across the valley. I was hot with passion, he said, and now she has met her reward. They also, no doubt, and behold, far away out of the wooded slopes across the valley, but in the clearness of the sunset, distinct and unmistakable, he saw a little spire of smoke. At the expression of serene resignation changed to be amazed, anger, spoke. He turned his head to the white horse about and hesitated, and as he did, so the little rush of air ripped through the grass about him. Far away upon some reeds swayed a tattered sheet of gray. He looked at the cobwebs. He looked at the smoke. Perhaps, after all, it's not them, he said at last, but he knew better. After he had stared at the smoke for some time, he mounted the white horse. As he rode, he picked his way amidst stranded masses of bread. For some reason, there were many dead spiders on the ground, and those that lived feasted guiltily on their fellows. At the sound of the horses' hoofs, they fled. Their time had passed, for the ground without either a wind to carry them or winding sheet ready. For all their poison could do him little evil. He flicked with his belt at those he fancied came too near. Once, where a number ran together over a bare place, He was minded to dismount and trample them with his boots, but his impulse he overcame. Ever and again he turned in the saddle and looked back to ask the smoke. Spiders, he muttered over and over again. Spiders. Well, well. The next time, I must spin a web. And that is it for part 2 in the last part of H.G. Wells' Valley of the Spiders. And thank y'all for listening. Have a good day. Bye.